Hi everyone. So I'm very happy to be with you today. Thanks for staying late. It's a very long chapter on network societies, new sovereignties, but it's definitely worth everyone's time. So I will start presenting myself and presenting a few projects at Tools for the Commons. So first, a few words about myself and answering a first implicit question, which is, what am I doing here based on this, So I should have been programmed to be a complete, absolute prototype of maybe what the state or the market could have programmed based on people who want to study economics and politics and mathematics. And I'll highlight a few of my experiences. So I studied philosophy and geopolitics, and my dream was basically to be a diplomat. And I wasn't that greedy at that time initially, so I was super happy with French minimum salary, working for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And it was my first experience in the African division of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And it's been an absolute disaster. So I was basically the only person who understands both geopolitics and accounting and who could make a few tricks. So if some of you ever complain about Argentine politics, look at the French and I think you'll have like a pretty reasonable comparison. So don't blame yourself, it's a world standard. And then I started to care about money, so because the French are not paying that well at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, minimum salary, mostly as a trainee. So then I joined hedge funds, so to understand more the market rules. So maybe if the state rules are not that great, maybe the market rules could be more interesting. And I really understood that this world had two extremes. It starts in New York and it ends in London. And you never go out of this, And it's been very disappointing, but at least I started to understand how the flow of funds and the flow of money could work and how we could package, unpackage, and repackage money in pretty much any of those forms to create a circular conduit with money. So that was the main takeaway. I wanted to work in Latin America. I spent some time in Spain before. And then, it was this time in the front page of The Economist with Brazil takes off and the Olympics and the World Cup and booming GDP. And then I said, okay, so I want to go to Brazil. So I went to Brazil, started to work with a few mandates, the biggest of which was Norges Bank, and mostly to create new laws. And then in the same way that with hedge funds, we are creating new laws of, okay, I want to repackage money in any of its forms, from a Kazakhstan pension fund into a listed company in the US who are doing the same thing here with the pension funds of Norway and Harvard Endowment. By the way, Harvard is not a university, it's a hedge fund, that looks like a university. That's the way it works, And then every time a law wasn't working, we were creating new laws based on the laws of money. How can money move around the world with the time value of money? And then I created a division of another fund to create a new asset class that's called litigation finance. So I started to be fascinated with how laws work and how laws and most of human laws are temporary conventions. There's nothing defining the laws of physics in most of what we do. It's just a temporary convention. So how could we just reframe this temporary convention? And then I created a new asset class, mostly in Europe and Latin America, that's litigation finance. In other words, how could we make justice absolutely democratic? So how could we create a mechanism whereby any SMB or just person could access the highest, the best justice and pay the best lawyers in the world if the case is good, and it became an asset class. And finally, my past experience was to create the first tech lender in Latin America, so to create a new collateral that could be digital data, digital sales, digital activity, and how could you have all this into your national credit score, and how could you get the banks funding you against this, and how could you get even during COVID, the very central bank of Brazil printing money into that protocol for rescue financing because the state-owned banks, such as Banco do Brasil, such as Caixa Econômica Federal, didn't even have the distribution channels when everybody was stuck at home. So, but everybody had Facebook, Google, Instagram, Mercado Libre, that is very strong in Brazil, and we could just like mint wallets based on this. And because SMBs had less than 23 days of cash during COVID with no social security, then the central bank just said, hey, let's just print money into this protocol and we'll figure it out after how we make this legit. So with this, I came to the conclusion that you can change the laws. That's the main takeaway of this. And to change the laws, you need to understand interoperability and you need to create a sense of urgency. And this is how the idea of tools for the commons came, understanding where we are. So we are all fishes here, and as fishes, my question for you is, how is the water? You know? And the water is like this. The water is like our conventions are coming from the Westphalia Treaty, from nation states. And those conventions are mostly operated by very powerful tools that have been created 200, 300 years ago, mostly maps, printers, and guns. And this is how we create an economy and a society of fear. But the reality of what unites us here is more internet, compute, storage, network, smart contracts, software, crypto. This is the new tooling. So how could we build new institutions that could be more decentralized, where we could introduce governance competition that would be code first instead of code last, and that could be consensual, where we are not forced into a collective contract just because of the zip code where we were born, but where we could actually split the stack. And so in that context, we were born to restore access to public goods in a fully delocalized manner and to propel the great diffusion. So what is the great diffusion is this trend that you could see on the right-hand side of the slide, where everything can become more local, where we can propel circular economy, where we can create collaboration mechanisms that are more consensual, and all this with a shared abundance approach, all this connecting the laws of money and currency and funding and investment, and all this with constitutional and diplomatic recognition to find somewhere in a piece of paper that could be in a central bank, in a constitution, in a special economic zone, in a ministry, in a convention, in a decree, written somewhere that it works and it's legit, you know. And for this, we are building a protocol of this great diffusion era. And this protocol has to sustain mostly digital economic zones or network societies to operate this transition between the static, Westphalia, sedentary, post-monarchy nation states with printers, mostly post-Gutenberg, which is the convention we are in right now, and to operate network societies that are consensual and that have a capacity for collective action, that can organize their shared resources in many ways, in a state way, it would be a decentralized state, in a peer-to-peer way, in a quadratic funding way, or just following the laws of the peer-to-peer internet, and to create digital territories. So what is a digital territory is another convention. Humans are very creative, so let's create this new convention of a digital territory. And by the way, when you read most of the constitutions in the world of the 194 countries, there's no, in most constitutions, it's not written anywhere that it has to be physical based on the zip code. So I'm pretty sure I have to study more the Argentine constitution, but I'm pretty sure that it's written nowhere that you can't create a digital territory. At least in the Brazilian constitution, it's not written at all, you know. And you could have like special territories such as Fernando de Noronha, for instance, that was like completely offshore. What is an embassy? An embassy is like a piece of a country in another zip code. So if we can have embassies, why couldn't we have digital territories? And based on this, I think we could create moves and changes that are really relevant from a top-down approach. So look at special economic zone, and most of this is just mostly driven by China. China's development has been mostly propelled by special economic zone, and it actually matters. It's more than $3 trillion as an industry, as a world industry, and China is a big piece of this. When we look about the great diffusion, so people that are diffused all over the world, it's a big market, it's a big industry. Like, look at diasporas, it's more than $1 trillion. Look at refugees, either voluntary or non-modern refugees, it's more than $200 billion of people that have to leave a place, either because of geopolitical turmoils or because of climate turmoils. So now let's make a collective effort of imagining a world where we have Anna, she's from Mendoza, and let's project ourselves in 10, 15 years from now, and she can basically opt in like a Lego and start building into pieces a world where Anna from Mendoza, that's a mother, and she could send her daughter to a public Spanish school in a digital Spain that has a decree with digital Argentina for public goods where she can opt in into a Spanish-speaking system and where she can access many hospitals, even in Buenos Aires, that are part of the British NHS. And as an accountant, she could basically enter commercial agreements that use international law with international arbitration. And that's making this kind of design thinking that we are building our products. Now, let's make another example. You have Ahmed, who was born in Ethiopia. He fled to Kenya when he was a teenager. And we could build a future for him where he can access the direct democracy of Taiwan with direct dynamics to change the rules. He could access online classes in a similar standard to the MIT as a public good provided by this digital jurisdiction. And he could get a 2-year visa to fly to Argentina, Brazil, US, and China for his commercial public activities. And to build this, when we make this kind of design thinking, mostly me coming from the fintech world, ensure that it's actually possible. And I did that just transforming country by banks. So if we follow just the same playbook of how fintechs have been created, I deeply believe that we can do the exact same thing for governance and governments. So what did we do in fintechs back in the days, 10 years ago, when we said, hey, I want to build a bank? And this was completely crazy 10 years ago. So how do you build a bank? Step one, you find a host bank, and you say, hey, I want you to be I will be your bank correspondent, so can you host me? And then they say, yeah, I can host you. So then all of a sudden you create a web page where you just write a disclaimer that you're actually not really a bank, you are just the bank correspondent of your host, And then once you start being big, you knock to the central bank's doors and you say, hey, now I want new licenses. So I don't need to be a full stack bank, but I'm pretty good about payment. I'm pretty good about credit. I'm pretty good about insurance. So why don't you create a new license that say, hey, you are fully authorized and recognized as a payment provider, and you no longer need to be a bank correspondent of anyone. I recognize you constitutionally or diplomatically as a credit provider or as a payment provider. And then comes interoperability. So those protocols of payments and wallet and credit that follow the same rules and that interoperate with the banks, where as a wallet provider recognized by the central bank, you can offer a wallet for someone that is at Santander, which is a bank, with interoperability without having to steal the client. This is the promise of open banking. And finally, you interoperate all this with the laws of peer-to-peer technologies, with the peer-to-peer internet. So you interoperate this with decentralized finance, with tokenization, and then you get the full stack. So now let's do the exact same exercise with countries, right? So let's just replace banks by countries. So first you find your host. You say, hey, can I build a web page? And I say, hey, I'm a country. And can I write the disclaimer that we're actually not exactly a country, but we have an agreement with the host, and see where it takes us. Then second step, as all this makes a proof of concept, at least digitally, how could we get new diplomatic licenses? And this is where digital economic zones come. This is where the Argentine sandbox comes. This is where the Zanzibar free zone comes, okay, it's more than just a host. It's a real zone, diplomatically recognized. Then step 3 is the ramps, but instead of being financial ramps, these are civics ramps. So think about an ID. If your ID here online or on-chain can be on-ramped at a national level, and vice versa with off-ramp as well, then we create the rails. And finally comes DeepIn that has been explained here. So once you start connecting this to the real world, to the physical territory, then you can really crowdfund physical territories with a diplomatic recognition. So when you have a distributed energy, distributed storage, real estate tokenization, IoT connected to smart cities and the real world, then you close the stack. So this is where I wanted to spend most of the time here, and this is how and why I think that it's actually completely feasible as a protocol, as a playbook, of like step 1, 2, 3, 4. And for this, we need an ecosystem. So who are the stakeholders of this ecosystem? These are obviously hosts. So who can be a host? A special economic zone can be a host. A private city can be a host. A government can be a host. Then we need builders. We need people, possibly like you, that say, hey, I want to build part of this equation. And then in all the areas of technology, of law, of education, of mobility. And then we need societies that say, hey, we want to build a new consensus. We want to organize our society in a very different way, so let's join forces. So these are a few work in progress. So Christophe discussed already the Zanzibar free zone. I think that part of those aspects actually do apply to a free zone. I mean, definitely apply in Zanzibar. I think that part of it could apply to Argentina, so we have a few ideas for Aleph and what could make sense in the Argentine context. We are working intensely in the Amazon region in Brazil as well to create special zones that would be bio-digital zones, at least in the Brazilian Amazon and potentially extendable to the Peruvian and Colombian Amazon. We have early talks even with the EU. The EU has a program called Horizon 2020 that actually enables this kind of digital innovation. And then these are a few like sub-items. So we need to program everything. We need to have programmable money, programmable investments, programmable companies, programmable civics, programmable taxes. So these are all sub-stacks that we are designing to make them as interoperable as possible with other Web 2 and other Web 3 stacks. I'll be short here, but now we are a company. So, and at some point we would like to have a non-profit and a for-profit organization and institution and organize all the stakeholders that you see a few slides ago and organize them as a community. But now we are in step 1, which is centralization, and at some point we would start decentralize and allocate our efforts between the for-profit and non-profit part of the endeavor. We have to educate this a lot, so we are traveling the entire world to be very vocal about this new paradigm and to ask the same questions to all of the fishes of like asking how is the water and and showing that it could be differently. It could work differently. I mean, we love Latin America. We have some people who work with us in Brazil, in Argentina, in Europe, in the areas of law, of finance, of structured finance, of digital products. And I discussed that, but what we want is really like to create an ecosystem where people proactively fix some pieces of the equation with legal engineering, tax engineering, financial engineering, tech engineering, and we want to create more and more hosts, more and more builders, more and more communities that get self-conscious about how to organize themselves in a different way, and at some point, so create volume on all the sides of the equation. And once we will get volume, we want to create a good matchmaking engine so that everyone can find the best communities they want to host, or the communities to find the best new users. So that's what we are building. These are my contact details if you want to reach out. I've been quite brief here because I think you heard very interesting use cases already with Threefold and Our World and the digital economic zones that where we're deploying like a huge energy here. And we can follow up here with some interactions with Coco that we wanted to share with you some of the interactions we had in the past few days as well.
Amazing. Give it up for Hugo. I'll invite Hugo. We'll have a chat just to dig deeper into tools for the commons. Mm-hmm. So the slide that definitely caught my attention was when you explained the use case in the African context. Big hint, I'm from Africa. I'm pretty sure I'm the only African at Aleph, maybe not. But can you give us more context on how Tools for the Commons is building in Africa?
Well, not only Africa, but for Africa, it's very relevant. So what we want to do is to dissociate the zip code trap to the access to public goods. And where is it a problem? It's definitely not a problem in Japan, in Singapore, in Spain, in Poland, where your passport is quite powerful. So it already gives you a lot of freedom. You can get a bank account, you can travel without visa in most of the world. You can have social security, you can have the NHS equivalent, you can have access to health. But guess what? If you are from South America, and probably even worse on a statistical basis from Africa, well, you can't even open a company. Most people don't even have an ID or a bank account. Most countries don't even enable to retrieve the money from the country. So I think it really helps because it creates a digital native institution where many public goods can be complementary with what the state offers or oftentimes doesn't offer. So this is where I think it can increase access for most Africans, that provided that they have an internet or a telecom connection. And it also helps to build capacitation. So I think maybe where Web 2 is about access, Web 3 is about enhancing capabilities. And I also think that it's a great way to build for society. So they could not only take from other social contracts, but they could also give in a very productive way to other social contracts.
So what do you think are some opportunities here in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, in Brazil, where you're from, in Chile, in Uruguay?
Yeah, definitely. So Argentina is work in progress with the sandbox here. We have a few ideas. Brazil, definitely. In countries such as Brazil and Argentina that have either provinces or states, it's hard to navigate because there's the constitutional layer, federal layer, state layer, municipalities layer. So it's not as easy to get a unilateral presidential decree, but at other layers, mostly provinces here and states in Brazil, combined with the good work at the Congress level, we can definitely achieve some good results in those very big countries. And in other, I would say, like less complex systems, such as Uruguay, where free zones already exist, or Chile that are already super advanced in terms of internet and interoperability, even legal interoperability, we have good hopes.
You know, a term, the term special economic zones has been thrown around many times throughout Crecimiento, throughout Aleph, throughout the Zanzalu, Zuzalu pop-up cities. But what do you, from your experience, what do you think everyone here in this room should know about this term, especially when in the context of building in these sandboxes?
I think what you should know is that maybe in 1 or 2 decades from now, what we would call special is what we live now. So I think we'll have to show pictures to our children of how it was with the maps, printers, and guns protocol. And I think our children and grandson and granddaughter won't believe this without a few pictures. So I think my message would be that laws are just temporary conventions, and we need to understand how temporary it is, so to understand exactly where it started, what triggered that, and that it's a convention. So if it's a convention, it means that a number of people feel comfortable with this. So you need to understand why, and then you need to understand whether they could feel comfortable with someone else as well. So special economic zones just means that a jurisdiction is as flexible and as plug and play, mostly with the rules of the internet, as a fintech is. Now, having PayPal on your mobile phone is completely normal. Paying in Bitcoin is completely normal. But this is a very special financial zone, you know? Think about it like 15 years ago. And those financial conventions have been completely broken. So I think that from a jurisdiction perspective, it's pretty much the same. And banks have been created pretty much in the same context and at the same time of states, you know, in this pretty much same modern era. And this convention fell already. So I think that it's possible, and really look at it as a variable and not as something that is set in stone.
I think you made it seem so easy when I was listening to your presentation. You simplified it into 4 easy steps. What are some complexities that we should be aware of when thinking about these special economic zones or building these network states?
The complexity is to make it simple and to dare testing. So for instance, in Brazil, the way it worked when we built the first tokenization laws was just to shoot an email to the president of the central bank of saying, hey, we are issuing a bond in Bitcoin. I couldn't find any law about this. Wow. He answered in 17 minutes. He said, hey, issue it.
17?
17.
Whoa.
Copying the entire directory of the central bank. He just say, hey, just issue it. And then now we can't regulate you because we don't even understand what it is about. We intend to regulate this. But if you make something interesting, we can use it as a jurisprudence for the next regulation or upcoming regulation. And it's exactly what happened. And then after I answered, and I say, okay, but how can I register it? Because I needed to register all those operations at the central bank and say, we don't have a clue, please suggest something. And then I answered right after, and I say, hey, in your system, I thought I found an other, you know, in the options. So you can pick your countries, you can pick your currencies, you can pick your interest rates in the central bank system. And then there was an other section, and I say, okay, why don't I copy-paste the Bitcoin key or Ethereum key or Solana key, where you'll find all the bylaws of the fixed income instrument, and I will just paste it in the other section. And they say, okay, seems to work. And now this is what you can see in the central bank booking, in the tax reports. That's exactly what they've been following. So dare to ask, dare to do, and I think, and at the end of the day, like this very pragmatic simplicity, and always showing the interest, the common interest of doing this. So at that time it was, hey, we are bringing more dollars into the country to build infrastructure, digital infrastructure. Sounds good, right? And then they say, yeah, so let's find a very practical way of making this happening.
And then really quickly, for me, the thing that I think of is where I'm from, it's not similar to Brazil, right? Brazil has some of the best financial infrastructure there is in the whole world. Are you telling me that with tools for the commons, it's possible to create a digital version of Eritrea?
I think it's possible, but it's not because of tools for the commons. It's possible because of the internet or telecommunications. So anyone with an internet connection, which is the most common denominator to access public goods, or mostly in the African context where internet penetration is still below 85%, a telecom access, so just access to the ability to send or receive an SMS, actually connects you to a much bigger audience than just your village or your nation that is tied to zip code. So if we could build a protocol that is compatible with SMS, so hence telco, and compatible with internet providers and Web 2 then, just combining this, I think we can get to a penetration of maybe 95% of people in Eritrea. And if we reach this, then we can build with the tooling and the set of steps I discussed, we could definitely build a digital Eritrea for the diaspora with independent banking, independent finance, independent IDs, independent protocols, independent collective action agendas, and that could run in parallel and probably offer the community much more than what typically just the state offers today.
And then, I guess last question, I alluded to it earlier in my introduction, but you've studied the Network States book by Balaji more than anyone I know. What would you say are like the top 3 messages, the key messages that for people who haven't read it, that they should understand?
Yeah, last year has been pretty intense, and there are like some of the teachers in the room here. So there's even in Brazil a community called IPCD that you can check that is really on this playbook of Network State that's really inspired by Balaji. Mm-hmm. Just a side note, Balaji is just one version of network societies. It's not the absolute single source of truth. And it's by a software engineer from Silicon Valley, so there's all these contexts and disclaimers. That said, the structure, the content, the documentation, and the use cases are extremely rich, and this is actually how I got into this. So the key messages, to me, are first the definition, and the definition makes sense from a logical perspective. So it's a highly aligned online community with the capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory all over the world and ultimately gains diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states. And this really follows the playbook, and this is what motivated me to get into the space. Because I like to dream, I like to read, but I like to execute, and when we see this, it looks quite executable. Second, I think it's about truth, and it also connects with other technologies such as oracles, and this is also why I like blockchain, because history is a lie, right? Is a lie told by the winners. And what sustains our protocols is the ability to control history, and so hence to control the lies. So I think blockchain is interesting for this because you have to study history. Mm-hmm. If you don't study history, you don't understand where you come from, and if you don't understand this, you can't understand where you are. So I think all the definitions about history and how history has been manipulated based on the absence of tools to have like an exact record of the events and facts. That's the second biggest consideration. And finally, I think peer-to-peer technologies as a whole and the laws of the internet. So really to have this obsession about just focus on the laws of physics. Forget about the laws of people. So we should allocate all our energy to defy the laws of physics. And these are the really hard rules. Like the laws of people are very simple. These are just temporary convention. So let's just change those those temporary conventions. That's the easy part, right? And let's really use let's use not the best mind, so let's use me. I'm not a physical quantum computing engineer, so like use people like me that don't understand anything about physics, the laws of physics, just to fix this, because that's the easy part. And let's use like the best people to really defy and challenge the laws of physics. So, I mean, we've been discussing longevity, we've been discussing like architecture. I mean, let's use our minds to build this, and if in the middle we need to change the laws, then let's use people like me, or if there are other people who don't understand a thing about the laws of physics, maybe we can team up and fix that along the way. But let's really focus on defying and challenging the laws of physics and not the laws of people, you know.
Amazing. And how can people connect with you? If they're interested in using tools for the commons, what do they do next?
There's a very simple website. We have newsletters, we have podcasts, so if you want to get into the podcast, feel free. We're organizing some conferences as well. So if you want to build with us, we like to work in partnerships, so we love joint ventures, we love revenue shares, we love any shared project at any level. So if you identify yourselves on level 0, 1, 2, or 3 in the below slide, please reach out. Or if you have any idea that we didn't think about, please, you can contact me either on WhatsApp, Telegram, X, or email.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hugo. Give it up for Hugo.